So the State Capture Commission has concluded its oral evidence hearings with President Cyril Ramaphosa trying to explain what he saw and did as widespread corruption and abuse of government positions engulfed the country. Ramaphosa appeared at the commission for 2 days this week and said he considered resigning from his post as former President Jacob Zuma's deputy, but decided to fight the rot from within. Reaction to his evidence has since been mixed, with some commentators and politicians questioning the level of honesty from what Ramaphosa said this week. Let's take stock of this then with political commentator Asanda Ngoasheng, who's joining us from Cape Town. We're hoping to bring in a second guest, Professor Chris Landsberg from UJ, if he finally becomes available to us. Asanda, let's begin with you. Thank you so much for your time on this Sunday afternoon. Did we learn anything new, anything useful from the President's evidence this week?
No, not really. I mean, I don't think there's anything new that Ramaphosa gave us. I don't think, he gave us any confidence, in fact, in terms of his own ability and future ability to actually stymie the corruption that's running rampant throughout the ANC. And I think that one of the biggest concerns is that whatever he says at the State Capture Commission is always going to be opposed by what he does, i.e. reappointing somebody like Zizi as the deputy minister of intelligence within the presidency, after he had appeared at the Zondo Commission talking about having received up to 2 million rands in gifts from influential people, and having not really given any solid reasons for that, outside of saying that he used it to buy a Jeep because, he couldn't get a bank loan, etc., etc. And so those are the things that people look to rather than what he sort of pays lip service to. And I think that, it was sad to watch for me, because it's essentially looking at somebody who's behaving as if there was an accident happening over there, and he's telling the story of how he observed the accident, rather than the fact that he was the second most powerful person in government as a deputy president at the time that the state capture was happening. It's not as if he had no power, and it's not as if he was too far removed from everything that was going on to do anything. And so it just raises those questions that we've always had about how is it possible for somebody who co-facilitated and co-participated in governance at the height of corruption in the Jacob Zuma era to now turn around and say that they are going to be making sure that, corruption is actually taken care of.
Just on that point, you bring up the issue of Zizi Kodwa, who is now a deputy minister in the presidency. Yes, he did appear at the state capture inquiry linked to certain allegations himself, right? President Ramaphosa was asked about another person who was also at some point part of his cabinet, David Mahlobo, right? There was also the question of Arthur Fraser. And in response to that, the president very much appeared to want to push it back to be something that will be evaluated upon the conclusion of the state capture inquiry's report. Is that not cowardly for someone who is number one, who should be making these decisions?
Yes, of course, it's very cowardly, but it's also to be expected. Ramaphosa has a knack for never really making any tough decisions and always trying to delay, making pronouncements on things that are difficult, particularly if you look at, someone like Arthur, who has been shown to have been alleged in spending about 20 million rands of intelligence's money, trying to get journalists on the side of the corrupt and trying to sort of stymie the tide of journalists who were exposing everything that was going on within the Jacob Zuma camp. And I think that, if you have, on the one hand, a president saying, I'm really trying my best, I'm really for, ending corruption in South Africa, and then on the other hand, you allowing people that, it's known, the evidence has been presented that these people have been involved in these acts, and you haven't done anything, and in fact, you promote them to even higher positions like he did with Jacob Zuma, because being in the presidency is really one of the highest positions that one can get. And so it really is walking right and talking left and is very much part of the tradition of the ANC, where they know how to draw the line, they know how to, say the right things. But when it comes to actually acting in ways that are filled with integrity and in ways that are what is required to right South Africa and to put South Africa back on track, they fail us constantly and consistently. And even the lack of urgency in his voice and the lack of, anger in his voice about people who were abusing power and people who were doing the abuse of that power under the name and the brand of the ANC. These are things that somebody who really is a leader that's against corruption should be coming out strongly about. But if you look at his demeanor, if you look at how chilled he really was just a guy watching an accident from across the road, and he wasn't involved in any way, and he did his best to bring in the paramedics as soon as he saw that there's an accident. That's kind of the conversation that he was having, and it was really disappointing and lackluster in my opinion.
And I'd said that we're expecting to be joined by Professor Chris Landsberg from the University of Johannesburg. It doesn't look as though it's going to happen, but you and I, Asanda, can march on with the conversation then. And quite curious from the evidence on the first day was the admission that the ANC's deployment committee didn't really keep minutes in the pre-2017 period. When you look at that, how do you begin to make sense of it? I know a 100-year-old plus organization that's been governing for over 20 years, almost 30 years now, not exactly keeping detailed minutes of who it's deploying, where, how, and why. Is it poor housekeeping or quite deliberate to avoid accountability and scrutiny of the decisions made on that forum?
It's definitely not poor housekeeping. It's definitely a deliberate act to make sure that it becomes more and more difficult to try to hold them accountable and tie them down to some of the really dodgy decisions that they make as a political party. I think that you must always remember that the history of the ANC is the history of a party that was banned, is the history of a political party that was used to operating in the shadows. Transparency and the ANC are not best friends. They haven't been for a long time, and they will continue to not be for quite a while, because you must remember that if your rules and your organizational culture is developed in a culture of secrecy, in a culture of, clandestine spy-like operations, it's very difficult to move from that into being democratic and transparent and everything in between. And so I always say that we are always with the ANC, like all liberation parties, going to be, held back and going to be, under the tyranny at this point of decisions that have nothing to do with the best interests of South Africa, but have a lot to do with loyalty, have a lot to do with who helped when we were, fighting apartheid, or when we were doing whatever it is that they can link each other to from a historical perspective. These are people who have been friends since they were 14. Some of them, when they joined the ANC, have gone to jail together, have come out of jail together, and have been cabinet members together. And so on some level, to expect them to cut their ties and do what is right is precisely what is a problem that we are facing now. And I think, and I've said this before, that it really is time for South Africans to rethink the ANC as the best political party that can run this country, to thank them for the great job that they did in supporting us fighting for our liberation, and to look for new political parties who can take us into the next century, who can take us into the next era of South Africa, because the kind of battles that we are fighting now require new thinking. They require a new type of understanding of the role of government and a new type of understanding of the world that we're living in. And my fear is that we are now living in a COVID-19 induced economic review globally. And if South Africa doesn't bring about enough change at the government level, at the economic level, we are going to be left behind, because every single country is undergoing this pandemic, is undergoing this economic review. And if we don't come up with new solutions, if we don't come up with fresh solutions in time, we're going to be left behind, and we're going to be surprised in 5 years' time when we are no longer a relevant country, because other countries have emerged from the ashes of COVID and have become the kind of economies that will be able to sustain themselves in 5 years and beyond. And we are simply being dragged by old ideas, by old thinking, and by loyalty and cadre, kind of allegiances that have nothing to do with South Africans and nothing to do with the interests of South Africans. We are a country that is being held hostage by 1.4 million members of the ANC who were voted in by 10 million voters out of a possible almost 30 million votes. And those are the things that we are going to continue to struggle with, and those are the things that are going to continue to lead us to be unable to hold the ANC accountable, because infrastructurally, institutionally, the organization is unable to deal with any kind of transparency.
So given then the present day challenges, you take that, you put it together with the president saying at the commission that he did consider resigning as deputy president, but thought it was much better to fight state capture from within. Is the country better or poorer for that decision?
I think that the country is poorer for that decision. I think that if you want to talk about, what people should have done in the Jacob Zuma era, I always take it back to the one man who had the potential to stem the tsunami as it was called, and that was Trevor Manuel, who was the finance minister at the time. If you remember, when Jacob Zuma was supposed to come into power, everybody that was part of the Mbeki cabinet resigned. He didn't resign. He held on, and I think in fact he resigned and then he sort of rescinded his resignation or something like that, but there was some hesitation, and he continued and decided to be a cabinet member. And because of that decision, we ended up with the 10 years of degradation, the 10 years of corruption. And so I think that Cyril Ramaphosa is exactly the same thing. It was a bad idea, and we are still going to see even more of the consequences of this bad idea. And I think that even all these people that are in the ANC that keep saying, oh, I didn't resign because I didn't want, they actually failed to put South Africa first. People who put South Africa first quit the ANC. They started COPE, quit the ANC, and actually chose to no longer be in politics. Those are people who actually understood that they needed to act in ways that were in the best interests of South Africa, and they needed to be in a position that when it comes to now, 10 years later, be able to say, I resigned because I could no longer be part of what was happening. And Cyril Ramaphosa, by not resigning, showed that the presidency, becoming president, was more important to him than actually ensuring that South Africa continues to be a country that we want to live in, and that, the kind of government that we get is a government that has the best interests of South Africa at heart. The ANC is not that political party, and the current government is going to continue to show us, because it is run by the ANC, because it is run by people who are not interested and can never and have never put the interests of the country first. And if you look at even the NPA, the way the NPA is dragging its feet in terms of bringing some of these people to book. We know so many names. We have seen so much evidence of corruption who they haven't even appeared in court. You have people like the Guptas who, at the very least, they should have been charged for tax evasion, because if you look at the amount of money that they have and the lack of tax paying that they have done in the country, that charge would have stuck. And then we could have come back and then started to prove the case that actually even this money that we are now suing you for tax on actually was not gotten through legal means. If we had started that journey 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we would be very far. But right now we're sitting with the Guptas who are living their best lives literally in Dubai without a care in the world, while we continue to pay. As South Africans, we pay with load shedding. As South Africans, we pay with lack of service delivery. As South Africans, we pay in many, many, many ways. And it is ordinary South Africans who pay the highest price. And it is hard-working South Africans who continue to pour tax into this country and receive Nothing. The middle class of South Africa receives nothing for their tax. They do not receive the health care that they pay for. They have to pay medical aid. They do not receive the protection that they pay for. They have to pay private security. They do not receive the education that they pay for. They have to pay private schools. And so why should South Africans continue to invest in this country and continue to invest in this government that is not interested in them beyond getting their tax? And we are seeing that many people are actually voting with their feet, and they're emigrating, and they are leaving this country. And we're going to have less and less taxpayers, and we're going to have more and more people on social grants, because the money that's supposed to be taken to revive this economy, the money that's supposed to be taken to create jobs, is literally going down the throats of friends and family of ANC people, is literally being burnt, in expensive vehicles that require all kinds of maintenance, is literally being spent in mansions where there's so many rooms that people have never even visited or slept in some of them. This is the kind of country that we have, and this is the kind of politician that we have created and will continue to create until we remove the African National Congress.
Very briefly, Asanda, quick final one because we're out of time. The State Capture Commission of Inquiry is done with oral hearings. Has the process been worth the 1 billion rand price tag?
I don't know if I would say it's been worth the 1 billion rand, but I think it's definitely been worth it, because it has exposed and made it very clear to all South Africans just how much rot there is within the government and within the ANC. It has made it very clear to everybody just how little caring there is for brand South Africa, for the lives of South Africans and the livelihoods of South Africans by the current governing ANC. And I think that without the State Commission, we would continue to foolishly believe that there's a way in which the situation can be turned around within ANC and government.
Asanda Ngoasheng, good to speak to you. Asanda joining us from Cape Town as we take stock of the weekend review. President Cyril Ramaphosa's evidence at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, as well as the inquiry itself, wrapping up at this stage, we're told, the oral submissions aspect of the evidence. Much more on the day's top stories in just a moment. Stay with Newsfeed PM.